Hello, I'm James. Welcome to part 2 of our bootcamp training series during our first ever Young Professionals Congress. This session will be exploring best practices hosting online events. This is going to be a brief series of tips and tricks to help you run online and virtual events, whether you're an SP section officer planning to run a large series of conferences, or if you're an individual just looking for the best way to host a small team presentation in your work. The tools used for virtual conferencing have been around for some time, but the functionality, the access and the quality of these platforms has increased dramatically as the demand for content has increased as well. However, the preparation and skills required is very different from running a traditional in-person event. My hope is that by following these 10 steps, you can make sure your event stands out and doesn't just seem like another regular Zoom call. So, let's get started. Step 1, knowing your goals. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of Zoom fatigue, and whether you're a student who hasn't been able to get on campus or your work requires you to work across all time zones, the chances are that you're now having to spend a good deal of your time talking to people via a laptop. And let's face it, it's boring. Well, boring is perhaps the wrong word, but it's hard to keep your attention and hard to focus while there are more exciting things going on just out of shot. There is a reason why popular television shows have to get more and more dramatic to keep your attention. And even now, a lot of TV just recaps itself over and over again because they know you're spending most of your time watching, but actually you're on your phone at the same time. Virtual events face the same thing, but we're not TV producers and we certainly don't have the budget to do anything like that. So, to ensure you have the best chance of success for your event, the first thing you should think about is, why am I hosting a virtual event? We know we can. Do we know if we should? We need to think of a few things. The main one being, what do you hope to be the end result of this event? Do you want to educate people on a certain topic? Do you want to connect people? Do you just want to stay engaged with an audience that you've already built up? Knowing your priority will help you determine the best structure and format you use for your event. But it also makes the event easier to market as well because you already have a clear drive of what you're trying to sell. Even if the solutions to these questions are clear and quick to answer, knowing you've considered it will give you the fortitude to help you put the time and effort that you're going to need to make it a success. Why do you want it to happen? What are you trying to say? Why now? It's only when you know these things that you really know that your message is best served by a webinar. You may find that actually, upon reflection, an article, a technical paper maybe, a physical event, maybe just a simple meeting is actually a better approach. Now step 2, knowing your audience. Now, doing things virtually opens up your audience to potentially anyone in the world. However, this doesn't mean that you can be relaxed about knowing who you want to attend your meeting. Inviting 10,000 people who have a vague interest in your event is not as good as 50 engaged and dedicated participants, even though seeing those figures may be really exciting. With virtual events, people simply don't set aside time to participate in the same way that they would for a physical event, even though the time actually needed is much less. It's highly likely that even if they have the event booked out in their calendar, it won't actually take priority if another meeting comes up, or if they're even simply busy that day. There is an inherent disengagement with watching an event on a screen, particularly when the audience is largely anonymous. I'm sure many of you who are listening to this now are probably typing away on some work emails or perhaps looking at your phone at the same time, and that's okay. It's the modern world we're living in. If I do have your full attention, by the way, thank you very much. You're a very special person indeed. But by understanding the realities of audience engagement, I've actually adapted my approach. It's for this reason I've made a conscious choice to make these videos short and concise, and you can watch them at any time and hopefully make them a bit engaging as well. Now, depending on your content, you can adapt your approach. For example, if you have keynote speakers who rarely make an appearance, you don't plan to record the session or share it afterwards. Or if you're maybe announcing the results or the launch of a campaign or prize, you can expect more on the day attendance. And this is true because you're rewarding your audience with a unique experience that only those who participate would get. The more unique and revolutionary your event is, the more this is true. Unfortunately, you can't expect the same level of engagement if your content is just repeating existing information already discussed elsewhere, even if that information is really important. Again, this doesn't make the content any less valid as a reason to host an event. You just have to adjust your expectations of your audience. Maybe encourage your speakers to do the same thing. Now, I can't end this step without saying be aware of the demographic aspects of your audience as well, by which I mean native languages, try not to speak too fast, or time zones. Maybe don't expect a large audience from Asia if you're hosting your event mid-afternoon US Central Time. And also don't expect people to stay too long staring at a screen. If you start running sessions over an hour long, you may expect people to drop in and out quite regularly. But from my experience, these issues are all secondary to what I previously mentioned. People will stay up till 3 AM in the morning if it means they get to watch the Oscars live, or if they get to see the latest episode of their favourite TV show, as soon as it comes out. If they're excited about the content, they'll turn up. So be honest with yourself. How novel and rewarding is your content to an audience already interested in the topic? If it's a discussion on a popular topic that everybody's talking about already, the chances are the information and the opinions discussed are already out in the world, but that doesn't make it any less important. Just expect more on-demand viewers than on the day. As long as people are watching, learning, and enjoying your content, your event is a success. So step 3, determining the best platform. So we know our aims of the event and we know what we can likely expect from our audience. That gives us what we need to know to make an informed decision on the platform that we use to host our event. For example, if the aim is to hear from a unique speaker on an important topic, then the traditional lecture presentation will be suitable. Most video conferencing platforms will have the chat functions and various ways your audience can engage, but if what the speaker has to say is the most important part, then as long as the quality of the stream and the audio is good and it's accessible to the majority of people, you can host it on Zoom, on WebEx or YouTube, or even just on social media. Amin Nazir would likely have as much or possibly more engagement talking about Saudi Aramco's plan for net zero emissions by 2060 if he just did it on LinkedIn. He would get maybe more than he would if he set up a Zoom meeting that required registration. However, we're a membership society, and I think for us there's an element of exclusivity that indicates the quality of our content. Our audience have a specific understanding and we can apply the knowledge we are sharing, which allows us to talk in much more detailed, useful and more complicated ways. More purpose-built conferencing platforms give you more control over your audience. As I said, Amin Nazir would get more views on LinkedIn, but those views would be the general public, activists, maybe shareholders. Therefore, the content that he says and the reaction that he expects will be significantly different to if he was to say the same things at the opening ceremony of a virtual industry conference. So again, consider the aims you're trying to achieve. Delegate numbers are not always the most important thing. For your meeting, the key aims may be networking, idea creation, or just having an open discussion with your audience. This requires a different way of engaging with speakers and your audience, and therefore different functionality is required. Many video conferencing platforms are mimicking each other and innovating their platforms on a fairly monthly basis, so do just keep an eye on developments. Don't necessarily stick to one and just use that for everything. For more complex events involving downloadable information, courses, training, maybe some exhibition stands, you will need to rely on a specialist platform to house this. Platforms may include iVent, SwapCard, Genially, just to name a few, but each come with different ways of costing their events, some based on how many you get to attend, some based on functionality, some based on the amount of time it takes to develop the software for you. When you have more significant cost implications like this, the aims and the audience of your meeting become even more critical that you need to know, as it may require you to charge or sort of sponsorship, which is its own challenge. There are lots of platforms to choose from, so do look around and see what matches your event criteria. If possible, make sure to practice or even play with the software. See what works, what doesn't. Just make sure you don't do that during the event. We'll get to that now. Now, timeframes. Generally the timeframes for virtual events is shorter than in-person events. This is mostly down to the availability. You're not having to book a specific meeting room or a venue. The internet can house as many webinars as you could want. You can also have much greater flexibility with speaker availability, as they're not having to travel and their time commitment is much less than a physical event. They can finish your meeting and jump straight into a finance meeting afterwards if they needed to. This is just one of the major benefits of virtual events, but similarly audiences can register to attend on much shorter notice as well. And while getting information out there as early as possible is advisable, as we've already mentioned, audience members, yes, you're fairly non-committal when it comes to digital events. So generally, those who book last minute or maybe on the day of the event are much more likely to actually attend than someone who books a month in advance. However, the things you want to do is to factor in the time it takes to adequately practice and prepare for the event. And by that I mean maybe writing an introduction script, getting any volunteers that you need, taking the time to practice and talk to your speakers about the expectations of your event. The more time you can give yourself for this, the more polished your event will be. You really want to go through every minute of your event to know who is doing what at any one time. Anticipate any potential issues and try and have backups for it where possible. If you want to create graphics or branding for your webinars, this also takes time, particularly if you're not used to doing things like this. Many of you watching are probably engineers, not graphic designers, so don't expect to do these things last minute and have good results. Give yourself time to breathe, time to consider, and time to plan. Now, step 5, working with speakers, moderators, and administrators. So let's talk about some of these things in more detail. The most important thing about working with others involved in your virtual events is that you cannot expect them to know everything about running an event, even if they're experienced in physical events or various other speaking opportunities. Running events virtually means people involved will have to be a lot more active in maintaining the success of the event. And what I mean by this is that speakers will not just be able to sit back and wait their turn to speak as they would at an in-person event. Instead, they're having to monitor the surrounding noise, whether they're muted or not, what their screen looks like, and their internet connectivity. Unlike an in-person event, there will not be other people who can step in and take control of these things if anything goes wrong. This can be challenging because your natural instinct when presenting is to focus purely on what you're saying, maybe what the other panelists are saying. But when these things go wrong, it can prevent the audience from being able to engage with the content, and they'll quite quickly leave if problems remain. Don't forget that virtual conferencing has only been common for a few years, and many speakers have only actually given virtual presentations since the pandemic. As a result, even experienced professionals who have given presentations on a regular basis, they may not understand everything that's required of them in a virtual setting. For this reason, it's important to have practice sessions with the speakers, the moderators, and any administrators who will help facilitate a platform. Where possible, this should be done in an environment that mimics the environment that would be used on the day. For example, try to see how the cameras and the audio equipment will work based on the room, the lighting, the noise that they will be expecting on the day. This will help prevent any awkward moments at the beginning of your session, like speakers trying to amend their microphone settings, or if they had lighting that means they're barely visible to the audience. All of this can be prevented by working with people in advance, and it also gives speakers an opportunity to talk about what they plan to discuss, which is often helpful for other speakers as well, who may overlap with that presentation. Presenting virtually often means you're alone, and that can feel daunting when you're about to host an event or give a presentation. What you want to ensure is that everybody's comfortable and at ease with what they need to do, just to avoid any nerves on the day. One role that people often forget about is the platform administrator I mentioned earlier. The role of the speaker and the moderator is often quite clear, but as I mentioned, there are often things that people have to do for virtual events that they don't usually consider for an in-person event. They can monitor the chat, vet the audience questions, check the various stream feeds that you have working, maybe send out messages to individuals about any technical issues they may have and not yet realise. Most platforms allow you to have multiple people who can host or co-host events, so feel free to have as many administrators as you need. You don't get to take the glory that the speakers or the moderator gets, but they are in effect the producers for the event. And they're the ones who will turn your normal conference into a smooth running event. They're the ones who can make sure you never hear, "Sorry, I was on mute," at one of your conferences. So now step 6, working with and without audiences. Now step 6 is to consider how your event will engage with audiences. And we've already explored what we can expect with regards to attendance, but now let's think about what we're expecting people to do on the day. I've hosted multiple events where we've had the aim to have much more of a two-way interaction with our audiences. The hope being that it will make the event more exciting and engaging for those who attend, and hopefully to encourage more people to attend live for the next one. This is particularly important for virtual networking sessions and things like that. Usually you tend to keep audiences invisible during the event. This is to avoid potential disruption and allows the speaker to focus on their presentation. This gives you much greater control over the quality of your content. It may even go as far as pre-recording your whole event, so there's no opportunity for any technical issues or audience disruption to affect the speakers. Given that the majority of the viewers will be watching on demand anyway, this is well worth considering, especially if you have more complex interactions between transitions or maybe different speakers and different presentations all happening. But this approach is only if the aim of your content is just simply to distribute expertise. If your meeting aim is actually to build a community or maybe build up on a broader discussion, then a live event is the way to go. This is where your producer or administrator will be pivotal. Their role allows them to connect to audiences without disrupting the rest of the event. Most people are quite shy to turn their camera on to ask questions in the same way as they would in person, but they may feel unprepared, they may feel they're not in a professional setting. However, some may. You can ask questions via the chat with your administrator, and they can invite participants to turn their camera on and ask their question when prompted. Getting audiences to ask their question on screen adds so much depth to your event. It shows people are listening, and it shows you as an event organizer care about the audience's opinion. And it may encourage more input rather than the majority of people just passively watching. Now, yes, things may go wrong. Yes, it may not look as professional to have wobbly handheld footage as people FaceTime using their phone, but there is a reason why news channels present from out in the field. They have the money to produce high quality features for all of their news stories in the safety of their studios. But by embracing the environment and the audience that they are talking about. It gives authenticity, relatability, and engagement that a more structured or pre-recorded news feature would not. Again, it all comes down to the aims of your session. For this event, my aim is just to provide a short overview on a topic that people can watch at their convenience. So a live approach or audience participation is not the key factor for this. But if my aim was to fully train audiences for hosting events, I would run this as a training course with activities and polls and questions where people could ask things and we can go back and forth. I could run it as a longer, more in-depth event, probably for a smaller audience. Now, I may do that in the future, but that doesn't really fit the purposes of the YP Congress, which is why I'm just aiming to cover a wide range of topics at a kind of high level. So remember, fit to your audience, to the aims of your event. And if you think your event will benefit from hearing from your audience, be brave, give it a go. Now, step 7, your on-the-day checks. Here I will go into a bit more detail on the run-up I described previously. Firstly, the host should log in around 30 minutes in advance of the event start time. Now this sounds like a long time, but as I'm about to explain, in reality it's only 15 minutes to sort things out before you're about to be swept up in other activities. This allows you to have time to check your systems, any polls that you have set up, make sure your live streaming links are all set up and ready to go, because as soon as your speakers arrive, your focus will be on them. So give yourself a bit of time to get yourself ready first. So then I would encourage all of your presenters and supporters, your administrators, to attend at least 10 or 15 minutes in advance. This should allow them to maybe restart a laptop, get their slides ready, update software and test the settings for everybody involved. Many speakers will have made last-minute amendments to their slides, so check if all of this is to be expected as well. If they've done this, make sure that they have the settings ready to share their screen and test that this actually works. And don't forget about sharing sound too if they have videos. Many of these settings are separate. Now, if everything runs smoothly, you have time to run through the agenda, make everybody comfortable, answer any final questions that anyone may have. Now, it's a helpful feature in programs such as Zoom to restrict who can enter the room. If you have a lot of attendees, this can sound like a tiresome job, but for many people, they do attempt to log in early to check their own laptops are working. So by having this restriction, it allows you to get everything ready before your audience enters the room. Those steps I mentioned previously will be very difficult if you're starting to see people come into the room already. Your administrator will be able to monitor people waiting in the lobby, and they'll be able to let people in when it's time. If things do get delayed, they can also message people and let them know what's going on. Your administrator should also use a secondary device to view the event as a participant. This is particularly useful if you're also live streaming your event to another source such as Vimeo or YouTube. It will show up any connection issues that you may not have noticed as a viewer in the meeting itself. Now, it's amazing how many times you will add a setting to an event in advance and it will then just magically default to another setting when you next log in, particularly if you try logging in from maybe a different device or maybe using a different email address or something like that. Now, step 8, during the event. Now, the idea behind all of this preparation is that during the event itself, it should be fairly similar to an in-person event. You want people to behave naturally as they were in person, to keep the flow of the meeting going. Now, the moderator should keep things moving to stick to time as much as possible as well. We've already mentioned people are quite non-committal when it comes to virtual events, and that gets even worse if you start your meeting late or you overrun, so that your event bleeds into those other commitments we were talking about earlier. Now, it is always worth scripting your introductions and outros, or at least having some notes. It's helpful to include those administrative details, because you'll always forget to say something important if you just make it up as you go. This should include things like thanking the audiences and the attendees, thanking the speakers, any sponsors, and reminding people who is hosting the event. Always remind people how to engage on the platform as well. Now, if it's pre-recorded, that can just be to explain people that they can reach out via other means, or if it's live, you can encourage people to come up with questions in advance, and more importantly, to not be afraid to engage with the features that you have set up. While the moderator and the speakers relax into their practiced presentations, the administrator will be constantly monitoring activity to quickly address any technical issues. They'll be admitting people to the rooms, engaging with the audiences via chat. Keeping people engaged directly is really important to help people from leaving the event if anything goes wrong. Now, depending on your meeting setting, you may need to mute or unmute people by stopping people from accidentally sharing their screen and things like that. You can have all of these settings that the administrator looks after. Now, if you have an administrator who is actually sharing their screen for maybe slides or videos, I'd strongly recommend letting them just focus on that one task alone. If you have multiple administrators responsible for multiple actions, it becomes more smooth and things run as it is, because people can just look after the task that they are specifically aiming to. If you try and do everything yourself, you're going to miss something. Now, when you get to closing your live event, I tend to end the event by sharing a slide or maybe a video with information on ways on how people can engage further. This allows people to leave the meeting if they need to, but if there are conversations that are going on in the chat, you don't want to stop that, and it allows people to complete that too. If you cut this off too early and there's a good discussion going, then you might impede the original aim of your event. Now, if you do need to close up the event, just pop a message in the chat and say we'll be closing in a few minutes, and you can continue the chat via social media or maybe some other means. Now, step 9 is the bit people are most worried about when things go wrong. So there are things you can prepare for, and there are things that you just can't. If you've followed all the steps above, you should be in a fairly good position, but there are a few other things you should do just for those more technical issues as well. Firstly, have multiple people who can actually host the event. If one computer crashes or if the battery dies, you have another person in the wings to immediately take their place. If this happens to a speaker who's giving the content, then that's a bit harder, but you just have to explain to the audience what's happened, and then you can move on to maybe another part of your event, and hopefully you can return to it later. Now, pre-recording content obviously makes this easier, as you will have multiple people with the MP4 and any one of them can play it, but you will lose that engagement with your audiences if you do this. Now, we also recommend having a form of communication with your organisers and speakers and administrators outside of email or the chat in the meeting itself. I usually have a WhatsApp group, as no matter what goes wrong with someone's laptop, you can guarantee their phone will still be working. If you want to have a discussion with the speakers off camera, you can do that via WhatsApp. Prompt people to get ready, notify people who are having issues that they haven't realised yet. You can do all of this without interrupting the meeting itself. The moderators must be able to stay in control and fill in if anything bad happens, but don't panic. Just allow your administrators to help resolve the issue as quickly as possible, and just stay engaged with the audience. I've seen people use things like backup audience polls to fill in the time, and that's worked really well. It gives you a topic to discuss while you wait for things in the back end to get sorted and get back on track, and that way you can keep the audience engaged for as long as possible. Now, if you practice your setup using the same rooms and the same technology and the same people that you plan to use on the day, this will solve the vast majority of issues. But if anything does happen, I hope these things will maybe help you as well. Now, the final step, step 10, follow up and on-demand content. Now, finally, you've run your event. Congratulations, that isn't the end though. Once you've thanked your speakers and we talked about sharing data on your events, told them the attendance figures, the engagement, that kind of thing. You should also thank your audience too. Acknowledgement will go a long way to get return viewers for your next one. You will also consider things like maybe some digital certificates, or maybe some more direct ways of showing your appreciation, like social media posts. You may also want to look at utilising your meeting recording. You may have a system in place already to house all of your videos, but it's always worth making it available if possible, and if the speakers are happy to do so as well. Now, don't forget that platforms such as YouTube have editing software built in, so when you upload a video, there's lots of free editing software out there, so you can use any of those. Maybe if you have something like 5 minutes of dead air before the event properly started, or if you have any big pauses or breakout sessions where the screen goes blank, you can edit all this fairly quickly. If certain videos get a lot of attention on demand, this can also help influence future events, or maybe could be good promotion for your activities as well. There's a lot of free content out there online now, but try to keep it. It's all valuable stuff. You never know when it will become useful in the future. So that's it for my 10 steps for a successful online event. I hope it hasn't been too long, and I hope it's been useful to you as well. There are lots of more detailed resources out there. LinkedIn Learning is a great tool if you have access to this. But there are lots of websites, webinars and event guidance out there if you do a little search. I'll add some links at the end of this presentation to help you get started, but don't forget platforms such as Zoom, YouTube, SwapGuard, they all have advice on making the most of their platforms on their sites as well. Most of this guidance will apply to other platforms as well, so do have a look. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening, and good luck with your events.